Scholars from the Museum of Pennsylvania University joined the archaeologists from the British Museum in fresh investigations. The stage tower on the lower Euphrates might hold the secret of this unknown Sumerian people and of the Ur of the Bible. But it was not until 1923 that a joint American and British team of archaeologists could set out. They were spared the tiresome journey on the backs of swaying camels. They went by the Baghdad Railway. Their equipment likewise went by train, trucks, rails, picks, spades, baskets. The archaeologists had enough funds at their disposal to turn up the whole countryside. They began their carefully planned excavation on a large scale. Since considerable finds might be expected, they reckon on taking several years. In charge of the expedition is Sir Charles Leonard Woolley. The 43-year-old Englishman had already won his spurs on expeditions and digs in Egypt, Nubia, and Carchemish on the upper Euphrates. Now, this talented and successful man makes Tel Amaquayar his life's work. Unlike the zealous but unsuspecting Taylor several decades before, his chief aim is not directed to the stage tower at all. He is possessed with a desire above all to investigate these flat mounds which rise all around him out of the vast sandy plain. Woolley's trained eye had not failed to note their striking configuration. They look like little table mountains. Flat on top, they slope downwards in an almost uniform pattern. Similar mounds exist in great numbers, large and small, in the Middle East, on the banks of the great rivers, in the midst of fertile plains, by the wayside on the routes followed by caravans from time immemorial. No one has yet been able to count them. We find them from the delta of the Euphrates and Tigris on the Persian Gulf to the highlands of Asia Minor, where the river Halys tumbles into the Black Sea, on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, in the valleys of Lebanon, on the Orontes in Syria, and in Palestine by the Jordan. These little eminences are the great quarries for archaeological finds, eagerly sought and often inexhaustible. They are not formed by the hand of nature, but are artificially created, piled high with the legacy of countless generations before us. Vast masses of rubble and rubbish from a bygone age which have accumulated from the remains of huts and houses, town walls, temples, or palaces. Each one of these hills took shape gradually, in the same way through a period of centuries or even millennia. At some point after men had first settled there, the place was destroyed by war, or was burned down, or was deserted by its inhabitants. Then came the conquerors or new settlers and built upon the self-same spot. Generation after generation built their settlements and cities, one on top of the other, on the identical site. In the course of time, the ruins and rubble of countless dwellings grew, layer by layer, foot by foot, into a sizable hill. The Arabs of today call such an artificial mound a tell. The same word was used even in ancient Babylon. Tell means mound. We come across the word in the Bible in Josh 11:13. During the conquest of Canaan, where cities that stood on their mounds are spoken of, it is these tulul, which is the plural of tell, which are meant. The Arabs make a clear distinction between a tell and a natural eminence, which they call a jebel. Every tell is, at the same time, a silent history book. Its strata are, for the archaeologist, like the leaves of a calendar. Page by page, he can make the past come to life again. Every layer, if we read it aright, tells of its own times, its life and customs, the craftsmanship and manners of its people. This skill on the part of the excavators in deciphering the message of the strata has reached astonishing heights of achievement. Stones, hewn or rough, bricks or traces of clay betray the nature of the building. Even decayed and weathered stones or the remains of brick dust can indicate exactly the ground plan of a building. Dark shadows show where once a fireplace radiated its warming glow. Broken pottery, armor, household utensils, and tools, which are to be found everywhere among the ruins, afford further help in this detective work on the past. How grateful are the scholars of today that the ancient world knew nothing of municipal cleansing departments. Anything that had become unusable or superfluous was simply thrown out and left to the tender mercies of time and the weather. Today, the different shapes, colors, and patterns of pots and vases can be so clearly distinguished that pottery has become archaeology's #1 measurement of time. Single potsherd, sometimes only fragments, make it possible to give a precise dating. As far back as the 2nd millennium BC, the greatest margin of error in establishing a date in this way is at the outside about 50 years. Priceless information was lost in the course of the first great excavations of last century because no one paid any attention to these apparently worthless bits of broken pottery. They were thrown aside. The only important things seemed to be great monuments, reliefs, statues, or jewels. Much that was of value was thus lost forever. The activities of Heinrich Schliemann, the antiquary, are an example of this sort of thing. Fired with ambition, he had only one end in view: to find Homer's Troy. He set his gangs of laborers on to digging straight down. Strata, which might have been of great value in establishing dates, were thrown aside as useless rubbish. At length, Schliemann unearthed a valuable treasure amid general acclamation, but it was not, as he thought, the treasure of Priam. His find belonged to a period several centuries earlier. Schliemann had missed the reward of his labors that would have meant so much to him by digging past it and going far too deep. Being a businessman, Schliemann was an amateur, a layman, but the professionals were, to begin with, no better. It is only during this century that the archaeologists have been working in accordance with approved methods. Beginning at the top and working down through the tell, they examine every square inch of the ground. Every tiny object, every piece of pottery is scrutinized. First, they dig a trench deep into the mound. The different colored strata lie open, like a cut cake, and the trained eye of the expert is able, at a rough glance, to place their historical perspective, whatever ancient human habitations lie embedded there. It was in accordance with this tried method that the Anglo-American expedition started work at Tel Amaquayar in 1923. In early December, there arose a cloud of dust over the rubble heap which lay east of the ziggurat and only a few steps from the broad ramp up, which ancient priests in solemn procession had approached the shrine of Nanna, the moon god. Fanned by a light wind, it spread across the site until it seemed as if the whole area around the old stage tower was shrouded in fine mist. Powdery sand whirling up from hundreds of spades indicated that the great dig had started. From the moment when the first spade struck the ground, an atmosphere of excitement hovered over every shovelful. Each spadeful was like a journey into an unknown land, where none knew beforehand what surprises lay ahead. Excitement gripped even Woolley and his companions. Would some important find richly reward them for their toil and sweat upon the hill? Would give up its secrets to them? None of these men could guess that for 6 long winter seasons, till the spring of 1929, they would be kept in suspense. This large-scale excavation deep in southern Mesopotamia was to reveal bit by bit those far-off days when a new land arose out of the delta of the 2 great rivers, and the first human settlers made their home there. Out of their painstaking research, carrying them back to a time 7,000 years before, events and names recorded in the Bible were more than once to take solid shape. The first thing they brought to light was a sacred precinct with the remains of 5 temples, which had once surrounded King Ur-Nammu's ziggurat in a semicircle. They were like fortresses, so thick were their walls. The biggest one, which was 100 by 60 yards square, was dedicated to the moon god. Another temple was in honor of Ningal, the goddess of the moon and wife of Nanna. Every temple had an inner court surrounded by a series of rooms. The old fountains were still standing, with long water troughs coated with bitumen. Deep grooves made with knives on the great brick tables showed where the sacrificial animals had been dissected. They were cooked as a common sacrificial meal on the hearths of the temple kitchens. Even the ovens for breaking bread were there. After 3,800 years, noted Woolley in his diary, we were able to light the fire again and put into commission once more the oldest kitchen in the world. Nowadays, churches, law courts, tax offices, and factories are quite separate establishments. It was otherwise in Ur. The sacred area, the temple precinct, was not reserved exclusively for the worship of the gods. The priest had many other things to do besides their holy office. As well as receiving the sacrifices, they collected the tithes and the taxes. That did not take place, however, without written confirmation. Every payment was noted on a little clay tablet, probably the first tax receipts ever issued. The amounts received were entered by scribes in weekly, monthly, and yearly totals. Minted currency was as yet unknown. Taxes were paid in kind. Every inhabitant of Ur paid in his own coin. Oil, cereals, fruit, wool, and cattle made their way into vast warehouses. Perishable articles went to the temple shops. Many goods were manufactured in factories owned by the temple. For example, in the spinning mills which the priest managed, one workshop produced 12 different kinds of fashionable clothing. Tablets found in this place gave the names of the mill girls and their quota of rations. Even the weight of the wool given to each worker and the number of garments made from it were meticulously recorded. In one of the legal buildings, they found copies of the sentences carefully stacked exactly as they are in the administrative offices of modern law courts. For 3 winter seasons, the Anglo-American expedition worked on at the site of ancient Ur, and still this extraordinary museum of man's early history had not yielded up all its secrets. Outside the temple area, the excavators had a further unprecedented surprise. South of the stage tower, as they were clearing away a series of mounds, there suddenly emerged from the rubble solid structures, row upon row of walls and facades, one after the other. As the sand was cleared away, it revealed a complete checkerboard of dwelling houses, whose ruins were in places still 10 feet high. Between them ran little alleyways. Here and there, open squares broke the line of the streets. Several weeks of hard work were necessary, and endless loads of rubble had to be removed before the diggers were faced with an unforgettable sight. Under the red slopes of Tel Amaquayar lay a whole city, bathed in the bright sunshine, awakened from its long sleep after many thousand years by the patient burrowing of the archaeologists. Woolley and his companions were beside themselves with joy, for below them lay Ur, the Ur of the Chaldees, to which the Bible refers, and how well its citizens lived, and in what spacious homes. No other Mesopotamian city has revealed such handsome and comfortable houses. Compared with them, the dwelling houses which have been preserved in Babylon are modest, in fact, miserable. Professor Koldewey, during German excavations there at the beginning of this century, found nothing but simple mud brick erections, 1 story high, with 3 or 4 rooms surrounding an open courtyard. That was how people lived about 600 BC in the much admired and extolled metropolis of Nebuchadnezzar the Great of Babylon. But 1,500 years before that, the citizens of Ur were living in large, 2-story villas with 13 or 14 rooms. The lower floor was solidly built of burnt brick, the upper floor of mud brick. The walls were neatly coated with plaster and whitewashed. A visitor would pass through the door into a small entrance hall where there was a basin to wash the dust off hands and feet. He then continued into the inner court, which was laid out in attractive paving. Round it were grouped the reception room, the kitchen, living rooms and private rooms, and the domestic chapel. Up a stone staircase which concealed a laboratory, he would reach a gallery from which branched off the rooms belonging to members of the family and the guest rooms. From beneath the debris of brick and plaster there emerged into the light of day all the things that these patrician houses had contained in the way of domestic appliances for ordinary use. Countless shards of pots, jugs, vases, and small clay tablets covered with writing combined to form a mosaic from which, piece by piece, a picture of everyday life in Ur could be reconstructed. Ur of the Chaldees was a powerful, prosperous, colorful, and busy capital city at the beginning of the second millennium BC. One idea was very much in Woolley's mind. Abraham is said to have come from Ur of the Chaldees. He must therefore have been born in one of these two-storied patrician houses and must have grown up there. Woolley wandered through these alleyways past the walls of the great temple, and as he looked up, he glimpsed this huge stage tower with its black, red, and blue blocks and its fringe of trees. "We must radically alter," he writes enthusiastically, "our view of the Hebrew patriarch when we see that his earlier years were passed in such sophisticated surroundings. He was the citizen of a great city and inherited the traditions of an old and highly organized civilization. The houses themselves reveal comfort and even luxury. We found copies of the hymns which were used in the services of the temples, and together with them mathematical tables. On these tables were anything from plain addition sums to formulae for the extraction of square and cube roots. In other texts, the writers had copied out the old building inscriptions to be found in the city, and had compiled in this way a short history of the temples. Abraham, no simple nomad this Abraham, but son of a great city of the second millennium BC. That was a sensational discovery, and one difficult to grasp. Newspapers and magazines carried photographs of the crumbling old stage tower and the ruins of the metropolis. They caused a tremendous sensation. People looked with astonishment at a drawing which bore the title, "A House in the Time of Abraham." Woolley had had this done by an artist. It is a genuine reconstruction in accordance with the finds. It shows the inner court of a villa-type house. Two tall jars stand on a tile pavement. A wooden balustrade running around the upper story shuts off the rooms from the courtyard. Was the old familiar picture of the patriarch Abraham, as it had been held for generations, which saw him surrounded by his family and his cattle, suddenly to be called in question? Woolley's idea did not remain unchallenged. Very soon theologians and even archaeologists registered their dissent. In favor of Woolley's idea were the words of Genesis 11:31. "And Terah took Abram his son and Lot, and they went forth from Ur of the Chaldees." But there are other references in the Bible which point to somewhere else. When Abraham sends his old servant from Canaan to the city of Nahor to fetch a wife for his son Isaac, he calls this place Nahor his country. Genesis 24:4. "His father's house and the land of my kindred." Genesis 24:7. Nahor lay in the north of Mesopotamia. After the conquest of the Promised Land, Joshua addressed the people in these words, "Your fathers dwelt on the other side of the flood in old time, even Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor." Joshua 24:2. In this case, the flood means, as in other places in the Bible, the Euphrates. The city of Ur was excavated on the right bank of the Euphrates. Looked at from Canaan, it lay on this side, not on the other side of the flood. Had Woolley been too hasty in his conclusions? What reliable evidence had the expedition produced? What proof was there that Terah and his son Abraham lived actually in the city of Ur? The earlier journey from Ur of the Chaldees to Haran has, apart from the discovery of the city itself, no archaeological foundation, declares Professor W. F. Albright of Johns Hopkins University. This scholar, who has himself conducted successful excavations and is the foremost authority on the archaeology of Palestine and the Middle East, goes further. The remarkable fact that the Greek translations of the Bible nowhere mention Ur, but read instead the more natural land of the Chaldees, might mean that the removal of Abraham's native place to Ur is possibly secondary, and was not generally known in the 3rd century BC. Ur emerged from the shadowy past as the capital city of the Sumerians, one of the oldest civilizations in Mesopotamia. As we know, the Sumerians were not Semites like the Hebrews. When the great invasion of Semitic nomads streamed out of the Arabian desert about 2000 BC, its first encounter in the south was with the extensive plantations of Ur, its houses and its canals. It is possible that some recollection of that great journey through the lands of the Fertile Crescent in which Ur was involved has resulted in its being mentioned in the Bible. Painstaking research, particularly excavations in the last 2 decades, make it almost certain that Abraham cannot ever have been a citizen of the Sumerian metropolis. It would conflict with all the descriptions which the Bible gives of the kind of life lived by the patriarch. Abraham is a tent dweller. He moves with his flocks from pasture to pasture and from well to well. He does not live like a citizen of a great city. He lives the life of a typical nomad. As we shall see, it was much farther to the north of the Fertile Crescent that the stories of the biblical patriarchs emerged out of their mystical obscurity on to the plane of history.